Hello and welcome to our first recorded read aloud of our new novel, The Crowns of Croswald. So if you are here in class today, you don't need to listen to this. This is going to be a prologue, just like we read. But if you were absent and you want to get caught up, this is for you. So our story takes place in a magical world, similar to Harry Potter, but definitely different. And it tracks a young girl who is trying to navigate her powers. So we're going to read the back of the book, and then we're going to start with the prologue. The back says, in Croswald, the only thing more powerful than dark magic is one secret. For 16 years, Ivy Lovely has been hidden behind an enchanted boundary that separates the mundane from the magical. And when Ivy crosses the border, her powers awaken. Curiosity leads her crashing through a series of adventures at Halls of Ivy, a school where students learn to master their magical blood and the power of Croswald's mysterious gems. When Ivy's magic and her life is threatened by the Dark Queen, she scrambles to unearth her history and save Croswald before the truth is swept away forever. Ooh, I'm opening up to the first page and I see this thing that looks like my cat's tail, but that is actually a quill. So a quill is a feather pen. Sometimes you see it in like way old-timey books, or you got them writing with the tip of the feather here. That's going to be really important to our main character. He is what we call a scrivenist. So a scrivenist, I learned today, is someone who is able to do magic through their writing. The village, well, it had a lot of secrets, and its secrets need to be kept safe. So the town's name was like a key. Those who knew the name could find the village, but let's call it the town. It was early winter, early morning, and snow flurries swirled in the dry, inhospitable air. They made a soft white covering over the town's crooked angles, thick roofs, and dark buildings cut from porous stone. On the cabby roof deck, a thick mist covered what the snow didn't. The Harrys were still glowing in the lanterns dangling from lampposts. Oh, there's the Harrys. Their little fairy bodies almost hidden under their colorful, illuminated hair. So they're like the light bulbs. That's kind of cool. Beneath a particularly bright lantern on the roof deck overlooking the town, inside of which a curious pair of Harrys mashed their noses against the cold glass, stood a young man. Derwin Edgar Knight. He was small-framed, but held his body rigidly at his full height, chin high, shoulders squared. His pride was well-deserved. He was one of the most promising students that anyone in the town had ever encountered. Even the Harrys were curious about him. What adventures in magic lay ahead for Derwin? Leaning on the iron railing and looking over the enchanted, forbidden town, Derwin wondered what his assigned castle would look like. He was sure that he would be a world-renowned scrivenist, but his royal family, would they be kind to him? And which family would it be? Just visible through the cloud that seemed to sit on the ground, he could see a dreary street paved with uneven cobblestones. Other scrivenists began to assemble around him, umbrellas floating above their owners and protecting them from the flurries. In the warmer season, the snow turned to rain for a few moons, but other than that, the snow was as much of a resident here as the scrivenists who came to study. So he's at a school, and all around him are people that have studied the art of magical writing. He's like looking down on everyone. The trickle of people grew steadily until a crowd rushed past the tailor, the pie shop, the potion apothecary, and other stores that lined the street that led to the cabby roof deck. Each wore crisp new uniforms. These uniforms had been around as long as scrivenists had been writing, exploring the magic of Croswald and serving the royal class in their cavernous castles. Derwin was lost in his thoughts and distracted by the crowd that pressed on the platform, eager for their own adventures. He made his way through the line, his satchel heavy with books. The rooftop deck was just beginning to steam as the warmth of morning broke through. He directed his gaze towards the newspaper that he held but he hadn't read. "The Scriven This" was the headline, and it said, "Wandering family still lost." He skimmed the first line. "Selector scouting Scrivenists for..." The article attributed the disappearance to a suspected at-large dwarf who had cursed the family 7 generations ago. So this newspaper is saying there's a family that's lost, and the rest of the article is like, it could have been this dwarf who had cursed the family. We have no idea. All these words went perfectly undigested by our young Scrivenist, meaning he's reading them and he's not really paying attention. Strangely, since he had received his deed of service, he had a problem focusing on anything for very long. This was very uncharacteristic. He chalked the haze in his brain up to the excitement of finishing his studies. It was the day of ordination for newly minted Scrivenists, so basically he graduated, and now he's moving on to a next chapter in his life. Having completed the prerequisite training and apprenticeship in the town, these bright scholars were off to ply their trade for the royal families to whom they had been assigned. So after you graduate from high school or from college and you're ready to get a job, you go off into the real world, and that's kind of what's happening here. He's graduated from this university, and he's being assigned a royal family. He's going to be living in a castle, working with the royal family, doing his magic. He's really pumped about this, but he doesn't know where he's going yet. Standing together on the platform, their energy was palatable, meaning everyone was excited and you could tell. It was no wonder why their newly minted quills were quivering in the special pocket of their plum-colored, tightly buttoned tweed jackets, so all their pens are like, woo, we're excited. The air hummed, and one small Scrivenist practiced turning snowy slush into a sweet delicacy. So this one person's taking their pen and they're like turning the snow into ice cream. I'm jealous. "I can't believe it!" A tall, slender Scrivenist's face was alight with anticipation. "See ya, books in class. I'm off to do real magic." Although she addressed no one in particular, a bearded Scrivenist responded with a sly smile. "Careful. You may not have to study books now, but you do have to write them." She laughed. "Ever since I felt the magic in my bones at age 8, I knew I'd be more of the doing type of Scrivenist and less of the writing type." And with that, she drew her quill from her jacket and swooped a large arc, her many-layered tweed skirt twirling around her knees. Tiny yellow sparks turned to flowers, with a lovely fragrance that fell on those around her. "I can hardly believe that this," Derwin said, unrolling a scroll of paper. "This small thing holds my future. Embossed letters telling me where I will live and serve the rest of my days." So he's got this piece of paper and he's like, my future is here in my hands. "I hope the royal family appreciate Flora." The female Scrivenist continued to send flowers out over the crowd. To Derwin's left stood a Scrivenist reading her copy of Creaking Cauldrons, a self-Yelp book for leaks and squeaks. The fellow pressed into his right shoulder was deeply interested in How to Tame a Scrivenly Beard. He's reading a book on beards? Okay. Though young, Derwin was assured of his superior skill. His performance and confidence had surely guided him to a posh position. He is super full of himself. He's like, I'm the best, I'm the brightest, I'm the smartest. That means that my position for wherever I work is going to be the best there is. As was his nature, he noted with a slightly proud smirk that he was by far the brightest person on the platform. He's like, I'm smarter than everyone. I'm better than everyone. As he made his way up through the line, Derwin knocked on his heels, and his deed of service was clutched to his side. The anticipation, the urge to cast spells and invent was almost too much to bear. Derwin patted his pocket. Aha! His quill, the Scrivenist's most prized possession. It was exceptional. silver-nibbed and rarely handled. It was one of a kind. It was a cross between a rapier and a writhing snake. Oh, you know how in Harry Potter, how his wand finds him, and that's like the wand that fits only that wizard? It's kind of like the pen. Its academic vigor matched his own. It represented the perfect cap to his completion of Scrivenist studies and a marker of his voyage into service. The crowd may have looked like a bunched-up jumble, but it actually formed a snaking line around the ornate ticket window. It was blocked off by a piece of solid brass. The whole booth was polished to a golden sheen, including the delicate bars that ran up and down the window that occupied the top half. The ticket booth was filled almost entirely with a large woman, the ticketing agent. Finally, the line snaked far enough along that it was Derwin's turn. Bright gold bars were about the only thing that stood between him and his dreams. He is ready. Finishing a wide-mouthed yawn, the ticketing agent hollered, "Next in line, please. Let's keep it moving." He handed her his deed, and she unrolled the document. She saw the family crest inside and stopped abruptly. Noting his confidence, she said, "You're not much for reading the news, are you? Or history? It makes every bit of sense that you'd be headed back there, doesn't it?" She smirked. Derwin could smell her breath. It was sickly sweet from too much pie. "It does, doesn't it?" he said. "I've been promised one of the most prestigious families in Croswald, cousins to the Queen, I hope. I'm sure their library is quite extensive. It needs a lot of magical management. Oh, and the acreage! So much to explore." Derwin's eyes glowed. It was strange, though, that he couldn't remember the family's name, but he was sure it was a good one. She removed her quill from her walnut inkwell and jabbed at Derwin's deed of service in a forceful fashion, inscribing something practically illegible across its entire width. The second, she stamped his deed, and then the writing began to fade as if the letters were disappearing into the mist. "Are you afraid you'll get lost on your way to the cabbie? Don't wander off now," she teased. But Derwin was already lost in his thoughts, wielding his quill and casting spells and creating magical beasts, all to a great applause in his mind. So he's like, "I don't care what's going on. I'm going to great places because I am the best, I'm the brightest, I'm the smartest." Remember, he's real into himself. He patted his quill pocket, conscious of its detection of magic behind the town's cloud cover. It was scanning for potion ingredients in the dark forest, itching and twitching to write. Derwin was so preoccupied that he missed the cabbie's approach, but the usual crash landing and the snorting of the giant rhino-like beast jolted him from reverie. The cabbie's station deck bore many deep scars in its wood from the rambunctious, barely-made-it landings. So, instead of catching a bus or a train or an Uber, he's about to ride on a gigantic beast that flies through the air. That's how he gets to school. I'm about that. I like that. It would cut down on traffic. The drivers and the beasts fairly careened in and out of the sky, and distractedly he stepped into one of the 3 house-like carriages that the beast towed through the air. So there's like this rhinoceros that has a little train car attached. Like all wheelless cabbie carriages, its small wooden door opened to what appeared to be a tiny, eccentrically decorated living room. Mismatched chairs and wicker benches were jammed inside, leaving little in the way of legroom. By now, with several seasons of Scrivenist training under his belt and cabbies being the only way in and out of the town, he was quite familiar with the rocking and the jolting of cabbie air travel. So he's used to traveling on these big old rhinoceros bodies. Reggie, thank you. The takeoff was always the roughest part. Or was it the landing? Either way, both were highly uncomfortable. Derwin was careful to get a spot on the bench near a portal-like window. Not that there would be much of a view. As dozens of Scrivenists crammed inside, Derwin looked out of the hindquarters, of the 5,000-pound beast that towed the carriage. So he's like looking out at the butt of this beast that's pulling this carriage through the sky. The flowery scrivenist had managed to wedge herself next to Derwin and was looking out of the portal as well. "Oh, I wish I could see my castle from the sky," she said. "You know, like before we land. What fun! This blasted cabbie storm. I nearly need all the stomach bastille after each ride." She's like, I'm sorry about her tale. She's like, this scrivenist is like, "I'm going to get car sick or beast sick or air sick. I don't know what you get, but I wish I had something to settle my stomach." Derwin was a little annoyed to be taken away from the richness of his daydreams, but he said, "Don't you know the cabbie storm is the only disguise that..." I know, she sighed. "To protect the coordinates of the town and its riders, all cabbies created their mobile weather systems to conceal their journey." Derwin didn't bother telling her about the intricacies of the cabbie storm spell and the peculiarities of the beast. Even now, he could feel the storm whipping itself into existence. He took comfort knowing that all anyone on the ground could see was a roiling, cabbie-created squall. With just a jolt and a snort and the beast, they took off. "I've surely landed in one of the choicest positions of all of Croswald," Derwin thought to himself. "Reggie, leave my quill alone. What you doing?" "Gotta hide that." He sighed happily in his daze. What's that?" a young man asked Derwin. "He's just thinking about how magnificent he is," said another in a less charitable tone. Derwin only smiled. They traveled for hours just as the sun set. A strange treetop in the forest appeared through a momentary clearing in the storm. The tree rose above the rest, its foliage darker and somehow metallic blue and angular. Derwin caught glimpses of this eerie outline cutting through the haze like glass, twinkling as lightning ricocheted in the sky. His quill now practically burst from his jacket. The cabbie continued to descend, tumbling closer to the tree's spire until brush scraped the sides of the carriage and jolted the riders even more than the bumpy ride. Finally, in a tumble of wicker benches and plum-colored pillows, they stopped. "Derwin Edgar Knight!" trilled the cabbie driver. He straightened his jacket, gathered his satchel, and lifted his trunk. He ignored the hushed whispers of the other scrivenists. This tree, of course, was the largest, tallest spire on what had to be the grandest structure that Derwin had ever seen. So he's looking at his castle, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, it's huge." Derwin approached his new family's castle and his new home, and suddenly the castle shimmered as if it were neither solid nor real. So you know when you look at like a hologram and it kind of fades in and out? That's what's happening with his castle. He felt a wave of recognition roll over him. He knew this place. He had spent many hours here, but he tried with all of his might to remember the name of the family in his deed. But not only could he not recall the name, his feeling of recognition had disappeared as well. He's having deja vu, and he's like, "I don't remember anything now." He came to what must have been a clearing, perhaps a garden. An enormous wrought iron gate stood in the end of a winding path lined with lavender trees in full bloom. The gate twisted in a floral pattern and rose to at least 4 times Derwin's height. Behind the castle was a large gray mountain. The castle was built up along the rock face of a cliff, and standing in front of it, in awe, he felt very, very small. Derwin paused. As grand as it was, the castle seemed unkempt. It's kind of like run down. Looking closer, he realized, in a shocking state of despair, that it was all in disrepair. As he approached, the ivy that hung around the castle seemed to grow before his eyes, creeping along as he walked. Rust corroded the blue metal roof of the turret, and the ivy was enshrouded with dark stones at the same rate. As Derwin reached the door, he saw the final swath of a beautiful sapphire metal that was encased in a layer of rust. In contrast to every castle he had ever seen, this one was perfectly unlit. No lights inside, everything's fallen apart. It's not really what he expected. Derwin stepped through the corner, left ajar into the massive entry, and as he did, billowing clouds of dust rose up from the marble floor. "Hello?" he called out tentatively. Cobwebs spun and spiraled from the foyer's enormous chandelier. The creaking door closed behind him, leaving Derwin alone in sheer darkness. The room was empty. And more than that, it appeared entirely deserted and forgotten. He stepped into the corner of the grand entranceway over a gray and white family crest, and from the circle inlay that surrounded the emblem, a dark fog began to swirl around Derwin, pulling the room further into darkness. The image of the castle around him began to waver like a mirage. Oh my God, he's getting swept up in mist. What the? But in a puff of marigold, Derwin was gone. And the room and the abandoned castle disappeared into the twilight. He's just been teleported. What? The strange fog dumped Derwin onto a path that clung to the side of a cliff. He cartwheeled and then came to an abrupt halt. At his rump bumped into the wheel of a carriage. So he hit his butt on a carriage. For a moment, all Derwin could see was the night sky and the trees overhead. Shaking his head, he sat up, trying to figure out his surroundings. The carriage was totaled. It had veered off the path and crashed into the tree several yards down the slope. He surveyed the scene. The carriage was empty, and the wood was quiet, and if anyone had survived the crash, which seemed highly impossible, they were gone without a trace. Derwin gulped as he looked down below the carriage. Suddenly he felt a tickle in his pocket. It was his quill. It was twitching in response to some magic inside the carriage's splintering frame. So it's I detect magic. Cautiously, Derwin inched closer to the opening, and he murmured a spell, and bits of debris on the bottom of the carriage hovered with a sparkle and moved away. So he's abracadabra, and then all of this debris starts leaving. Just beneath was a finely crafted box, unharmed by the crash. Its dark wood was well oiled, and as Derwin lifted the box with his quill, bringing it into the wreckage and onto his sweating palms, a pulsing white light seeped from the edges. So he's found this random box, and now it's got light coming out of it. Ooh, I would drop it. From the box in his left hand, Derwin made a swirling swoop with his quill, organizing the light into a halo. The illumination shone on the slip of folded parchment attached to the box's lid with a wax seal, and it was a letter. The only things that Derwin could focus on were the first and final lines. They were written in a hurried hand and read, "To the one whom this box is entrusted." And it was signed, "The hand that left her." Mysterious. Tomorrow's chapter is called The Slurry. And that's all we have for today. Thank you to the guest appearance by Reggie, who is now coming up in front of the camera, trying to get at my quill. No, my quill!